Hello, everyone, and I'm Jen Hawes, Partnership Manager at Island Press, and we are honored to be hosting the inaugural COTE Book Talk today, featuring Corey Squire's book, People, Planet, Design. During this conversation, Corey will be joined with Lindley Kent, and together they'll begin to answer the question, what if great design was defined by its ability to cool the planet, heal communities, enhance ecological functioning, and advance justice? Island Press would like to thank IAA COTE and the Oregon COTE chapter for their support of today's event. Here's just a brief run through of what to expect for today. First, Corey's going to give a guiding principles chat on his new book. It'll take about 20 minutes. Then Lindley will initiate a conversation with Corey to dive deeper into his content and the specific ideas, along with sharing her own insights. And then we'll share that rest of the time for your questions. So you are highly encouraged to engage with the panel today. To submit your questions, please use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have any trouble with the technology, please send a note either through the chat or the questions tab, and I'll help you out as best as I can. After today's event, we ask that you please fill out a brief survey. All survey responses are read and used to help inform the programming that we create, so your voice really does count. The session will be recorded. Please expect to see an email with the recording in the next few days. This webinar is brought to you in part by Island Press. Island Press is an environmental nonprofit book publisher and so much more. In a world flooded with information, Island Press connects the right ideas with the people who need them to build sustainable cities and protect the natural world. Island Press's mission is to elevate voices of change, shine a spotlight on crucial issues, and focus attention on sustainable solutions like we're doing here today. So if you'd like to hear more about us or make a donation, please go to islandpress.org. We are pleased to share that COTE Oregon has secured 1 AIA credit hour for today's event, and Island Press will be providing 1 USGBC GBCI credit hour. So if you need to access the USGBC course, I'm going to pop that into the chat right after I'm done with my opening remarks. And if you need a certificate and it doesn't come through after the event, please feel free to email IPWebinar, that's one word, IPWebinar@islandpress.org, and I can work with you on that. If you haven't done so already, we encourage you to buy Corey's book at 30% off the list price using the code COTEBOOKSQUIRE, all one word, in capital letters, at islandpress.org/book/people-planet-design. I will also put that in the chat. All right, now it's time for some bios to share about our panelists. Right, first up is Corey Squire. He's an architect and nationally recognized expert in sustainable design. He's a lecturer, author, and associate principal and director of sustainability at Fora Architects and Interiors. Lindley Kent is an architect and principal at Newman Monson Architects. She has won multiple awards for her work and is a leader in sustainable architecture design. Now I'm going to hand it over to Eliza to share some opening remarks from AIA Oregon COTE.
Good morning, everyone. AIA Oregon's Committee on the Environment recognizes Corey Squire's deep commitment to sustainable design and his vitally important contributions to the profession as co-writer of the AIA Framework for Design Excellence. We're excited about the positive impact his book will have on the design community and in Oregon abroad. The AIA Oregon Committee on the Environment recognizes our collective responsibility to positively impact the environment and our community. As a local affiliate of the American Institute of Architects COTE Knowledge Community, AIA Oregon COTE supports AIA National's COTE's mission to work for architects, allied professionals, and the public to achieve climate action and climate justice through design. We're focused on addressing issues of great importance in Oregon: energy use reduction, operational and embodied carbon reduction, climate justice and equity, health and well-being, and resiliency in response to extreme heat events and wildfires. People, planet, and design is an inspiring testimony to the power of design and will serve as an invaluable resource to AI COTE as we strive to educate professionals and the public on these issues. Thank you.
Great. And with that, I'm going to give Corey screen control.
All right. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Elisa. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see this?
Looks great.
All right. Thank you. Well, I'm Corey Squire. Super excited to be here today to talk about my new book, People, Planet, Design: A Practical Guide to Realizing Architecture's Potential. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about my background and kind of my goals in writing this book. So today, the Sustainability Director at Bora Architecture and Interiors in Portland, Oregon. We're a 70-person firm that works in a variety of market sectors: architecture, interiors, experiential design, and everything that we do is through the lens of climate, health, and equity, which is just super exciting that more and more firms are kind of looking at through these lenses, kind of when they consider design. But I want to start kind of way back. This is a picture of me on my first day as an architect, my first job in the profession. I was at Eskew Dumas Ripple in New Orleans, and we had just completed a 240 unit housing tower. And my task was to read every electrical meter from every unit once a month so that we can monitor the energy use and understand kind of the differences from one unit to the next. And I think it's really significant that I began my career with this focus on post-occupancy and outcomes. And it made me think, just kind of when we're designing something and we're trying to have an impact, how do our decisions end up in the electrical meter? So I took this focus to outcome-based design to Lake Flato Architects in San Antonio, where I was the sustainability manager. Here's a picture of the Josie Pavilion. This is the firm's first Living Building Challenge project. With in the foreground, there is the constructed wetlands that filtered the project's black and gray water. One of my goals at Lake Flato was to collect and document kind of all of the firm's sustainability knowledge and make that accessible to everyone. We had an intranet, and I built a toolkit. The idea was that we should learn from what we're doing, and we should kind of make sure that we're using the best strategies to continuously push the firm forward. And kind of, I became convinced of this idea that if you connect people with the right information, we can produce really great work. In 2018, I was selected to join the Committee on the Environment advisory group, and this is us, and we had an impromptu protest in front of the White House. At the time, it felt like sustainability was really kind of under attack. It also felt like the architecture profession, though we care deeply about sustainability, was a little bit unfocused about what we actually do about this. And this is the group that put together the resolution that resulted in the framework for design excellence being adopted by the board of directors of the AIA. So here's the resolution. We wanted the AIA to declare an urgent and sustained climate imperative to transform day-to-day practice of all architects by adopting the COTE top 10 measures as the framework for design excellence, and then to utilize and align our external messaging to leverage support. And then today, 5 years later, here's the framework, and it's been really impactful. It's made its way into design awards, and it's really influenced the conversation around what good design is and how architects should be thinking in terms of the broader impact that our work is having. Around the same time, I founded my own consulting firm, Department of Sustainability, and I worked with firms across the country to really advance sustainability within practice. Here's the question that I had been thinking about for a long time, which is what I brought to my consulting. Why do some projects perform better than others? Or if we zoom out a little bit, why do some practices perform better than others? Right? If we understood what this was, we can spread this knowledge and all firms and all projects could perform better. So I developed this kind of process, the elements of a high-performing practice, which I worked with firms across the country on kind of developing the skills and the knowledge and kind of the necessary kind of infrastructure within firms to advance sustainability. It's all focused around this vision, what we want to achieve, and then working backwards with process, culture, resources, strategies. And through my experience in firms and through my consulting, kind of this is what I learned. To excel in sustainability, a practice needs two things, right? You need the right knowledge and you need the right culture. And if you have only one of those things, you'll make a little bit of progress, but it won't. You won't get to this consistent high performance, right? If you have the right knowledge but the wrong culture, maybe you know what to do, but there's internal barriers preventing you from doing that. And if you have the right culture but not the right knowledge, you might not know where to start. And what I recognized was that there was a gap in the literature about sustainable design. There are lots of resources out there that describe sustainable design strategies, right? What's your orientation supposed to be? What's your window wall ratio supposed to be? What mechanical system should you be choosing? And there's some resources that are better than others, but there's really nothing out there that connects what we should do with how we actually do it within architectural practice, right? So that was my goal. I decided to write this book, and very specifically, the book is about design. It's not a book about sustainable design. It's more broad than that. It's what is good design and how do we define it and how do we practice it and how do we get the outcomes that we know are possible from a climate standpoint, from a health standpoint, from an equity standpoint. So this book was my precedent. Some of you in the audience might have read it before. It's a cookbook, but it takes a different approach. It doesn't have a list of recipes. It basically, as the tagline says, mastering the elements of good cooking. You have to understand how salt fits into a recipe, and you need to know that if you add more of it, your lentils will taste better. And you can take this knowledge and you can apply it to all sorts of cooking. Sustainability and architecture are probably a little bit more complex, but still I was trying to distill the fundamental elements of what we are trying to do. So I developed a few guiding principles to help me organize what I wanted to say in this book, right? The first one is that good design solves problems. If design is not solving a problem, or if design is making problems worse, it's first of all, it's not good. And should we even be considering that design? A second guiding principle, we already have all of the knowledge and all the technology that we need, right? We shouldn't be waiting for nuclear fusion. We shouldn't be waiting for the codes to catch up. It was not that long ago and that the world was powered by the sun, and it's more than likely that that'll happen again in the future. The constraints are not what they seem, right? Often we say that a project doesn't have the budget or the client's not interested. But maybe deeper, those are actually not what's preventing us from kind of doing the work that we want to be doing. The environment influences outcomes. This as much as the physical environment in which you're designing as the cultural environment and kind of the regulatory environment, basically the context within which architects practice. And then finally, architecture is for people. If we're not designing with the benefit of people, then like what are we doing? But often this is the actual pieces of a design that are most kind of focused on people are often the first to cut or the last to be considered. So those are the guiding principles for the book, and I also recognize there's a lot of challenges out there. One of the challenges is complexity. Design is complex, and sustainability adds additional complexity on top of that, right? And we already are constrained on time and budget. Another challenge is prioritization. If you look at something like a LEED checklist and it has a list of quote unquote sustainable strategies, it makes it seem as if like you could choose this sustainable strategy, that sustainable strategy, and it's all fine. But in reality, something like window wall ratio is infinitely more important for the performance and outcomes of projects than something like low flow fixtures. Another challenge is purpose, right? Often we get bogged down in process and we want to energy model our projects, which is obviously great. But the energy model is a tool towards which we can improve our design and kind of result in better outcomes. And then another challenge is distraction. There's lots of tools and resources out there that sell products or sell subscriptions or whatever else, where a practice might think that they can pay for a product and solve their problems in sustainability. But in reality, what we need is a vision. So here's the holistic approach. This is how the book is organized, right? The first step when I was organizing the book was to define the outcomes that architecture should achieve. So human health, social equity, carbon reductions, ecological thriving, and then trace each of those outcomes back to building systems that are most relevant in kind of delivering that outcome, that desirable outcome, right? So we have structural systems, we have windows, we have the roof, we have electricity. Step 3 was then to align those outcomes that we wanted to achieve with the systems that kind of determine them with effective design strategies. So if we want carbon reduction, windows are really important to that. And the specific design strategy is facade organization. You want a good window wall ratio, you want appropriate shading, you want good orientation, right? Or human health is an outcome that we want to achieve. And the air system within a building is really important for getting that outcome. The effective strategy that ties human health with the air system, one of them might be airtight construction, right? Another one might be appropriate filtration. If we want to achieve equity, material selection is a building system that's, or materials, finishes are especially important, right? And that results in, and the effective strategy is material sourcing. So step number 4 was to create an environment to make all this happen. And this is the kind of the firm culture piece. This is having a shared mission and vision. This is access to the right knowledge. This is effective communication, making sure that the incentives are the right ones, safety through social belonging within a practice, and then making sure that we're living and we're practicing the values that we state are important, right? This is the right culture, and then the previous kind of buildup is the right knowledge. Again, for a firm to excel, or for a practice, or for our profession, we really need to combine the right knowledge with the right culture. And that is what I hope that this book does, bridges this idea of what we want to do with how we do it. So the other piece that I wanted to achieve was to kind of simplify some complex ideas and present them graphically. Elena Zambrano, the illustrator of the book, did a phenomenal job of kind of distilling complex topics into these really fun illustrations that are throughout the book, which can help get some less than obvious ideas across. So the ultimate goal, just like with the resolution for the Framework Design Excellence, is practice transformation, right? How do we look at the architecture practice, which we design buildings, again, some are beneficial for people, for the community, for the planet, some are really harmful. How can we transform practice towards this idea where the goal of design is to benefit people, benefit the planet, benefit the community, right? So here are the 3 parts of the book. Part 1, theory. How do we transform practice? By adopting a unified vision for what is good design. My part 2 of the book is practice. And this is where we look into the kind of the whole cultural piece. How do we transform practice? By designing a culture that leads to desired outcomes. And then part 3 of the book is design. And the idea here is that if we understand and prioritize what's important, we can have a big impact. So who is this book for? I think there are multiple potential audiences, but the person that I wrote this book for is the architect who really wants their practice to do better work. Maybe this is somebody, maybe this is a designer, maybe this is someone in a dedicated sustainability role, maybe it's a principal who's looking to kind of bring the practice to the next level. But really somebody who's not satisfied with how either the practice or the profession is working towards sustainable design or advancing these goals around climate, health, and equity. And I think that the book provides a lot of benefit. The other audience is for architecture students. The generation that's currently in school, soon to enter the profession, is 100% kind of convinced that sustainability and equity are essential components to the profession. And they are really hungry for this knowledge of what we actually do. And there's just not resources out there that really get to the most effective modern strategies given the constraints that we're facing in terms of climate change, and then provide the resources of how they could implement these strategies within a project, within a firm, within their profession. So I found this comic. I thought it was totally funny. But the point here is I encourage people to read the book, right? I think that practice transformation is possible. It's hard, but I've seen it happen. A practice that's been around for decades can shift gears and really dedicate their work towards these outcomes of climate, health, and equity. And I think a lot of people are very keen on that happening. And I think that this is a powerful resource. So I encourage everyone to read the book, encourage others at their firm to read the book, discuss these ideas, come to a clear idea for yourselves of what is the definition of good design, what are the barriers that are standing in the way of the profession or an individual practice or you personally, and what are the strategies that we should be prioritizing in all of our work that get us the outcomes that we want to achieve. So, so writing a book takes a village, obviously. So just a moment to thank again Elena Zambrano, my editor. Sorry, not my illustrator, but also co-collaborator on a lot of these ideas. Thank Island Press for working with me on this project. COTE, obviously, for providing kind of endless support. And then also let you know that I'm embarking on a mini book tour. I have a few upcoming events in Texas in a few weeks, going to the Bay Area in April. I have a talk in Wisconsin, a talk in Seattle. So hope to see more of you in person, where we can dig into some of these ideas in a little bit more depth. So with that, thank you, and I'm looking forward to a conversation.
Great. Thanks so much, Corey. That was a great introduction to the book. I'm Lindley Kent, everyone, joining to help start off some discussion here. Hopefully everybody's seeing the chat. You're welcome to send questions that came up during Corey's presentation, or as we're talking about things, send them in that question dialog box there, and we'll have some time at the end here to answer audience questions as well. So kicking us off, you know, as I started reading this book, I really wanted to know what Corey was going to say that he did to get past all the clients that, you know, just don't seem to see the value in designing sustainably. You know, what is that secret sauce? We've all had projects where, for some sort of reason, it just wasn't prioritized. And so, what tips do you have to bake that into your discussions with clients and not set off their budget alarm bells, if you will?
Yeah, no, the budget alarm bells are a real issue, and often when you say the word sustainable, the first reaction to a client, whether they're like completely bought in that a project should be sustainable or like completely opposed to the idea, is that, oh, we can't do it. It's going to cost too much. So I think that the word sustainability is very much a trigger word, and I think we should generally avoid using it. And in my preface for the book is that I'm not even using the word. I don't think I use the word sustainable at all throughout the entire book, because that's kind of, I mean, use the word sustainable to like signal that you care about a certain set of things, but it doesn't have much meaning beyond that. I think that if you want to get these beneficial strategies into projects, we need to convince the clients of their benefit, right? So strategies around health. Clients really generally care about their health and the health of the people who occupy buildings. And speaking through the lens of health is a really valuable way of getting these ideas across. Resilience is another powerful strategy, especially given kind of recent events around extreme weather, around wildfire smoke. Kind of how is this design going to remain operations and to keep people safe during some future events? And it's easy for people to get bought onto these ideas. Now, the kicker here is that the strategies that result in energy efficiency, in carbon reduction, they're often the same as the strategies that result in a more resilient building and a healthier building. So if the goal is, let's just say, reducing energy use by having a more robust envelope and more, I don't know, optimized glazing, right? That's going to reduce operating costs. That's going to make people more comfortable, and that's going to make the building more resilient if there's a power outage or if there's a heat wave or whatever else. So hopefully that's my tip. I think we should stop using the word sustainability. I think we should talk purely through the lens of values, and we shouldn't propose things that don't make the project better from the perspective of the client.
Right, and if you're talking more holistic design and focusing on the framework for design excellence, sort of 10 measures too, you're talking in really common terms that I don't think intimidate or bring in the sustainability word, right?
Yeah, and I think what the framework for design excellence did is it took this amorphous term sustainability and replaced it with, as you say, very common terms, right? Energy, water, wellness, change, discovery, much simpler, much easier to get across.
Right. Well, so on the topic of not using taboo words, with today's political landscape, we know, the topic of sustainability is kind of become taboo in certain senses. So how are you avoiding bringing that into the conversation? Are there specific words beyond sustainability that you think are non-starters or things you do like to use more?
What I've found is so like we can start with kind of good design generically, and some things we want to describe and some things we really don't need to describe. Like it is within our capability to compose a facade that has appropriate window-wall ratio, appropriate depending on the orientation, right? And we never have to say to the client, oh, and by the way, we chose this window layout because it's more sustainable, right? We should design really beautiful things that also work really well. And we don't always have to give a reason behind what we're doing, right? And that's the case with some strategies, not all strategies. Like there are other issues, like my firm works in affordable housing, and a perennial challenge is kind of avoiding PVC flooring, which is standard in a lot of housing or institutional projects. And there is going to be a kind of a cost premium for something that's going to be less toxic or a little healthier. And make the case around that, right? And the case is purely from a health standpoint, with the kind of the benefit for the client, the benefit for the people who live there. And if there's a cost premium, we can consider where that cost comes from otherwise, right? Does that mean that our mechanical systems get a little bit smaller, but maybe that's okay because we have a more robust envelope, right? We look at kind of square footage, right? Square footage is often something, if you cut square footage, you always cut the cost of a project. So can we say that for a slightly smaller space, you can now kind of pay for the healthier flooring or whatever else you want. So like first design in the right way, and if there is something that's specific that has a cost premium, make the clear case about why it provides value, and then also how it's going to fit into the budget. I think that's really important to kind of come with that ambiguity.
Right, head it off at the pass. The budget is always going to be the biggest concern from clients' perspective, and obviously we have to be good stewards of that.
And I think that budget is kind of a manifestation of priorities, right? There's no such thing as like we can't afford it. It's always like we chose to buy something else. So people will prioritize. People will pay for what they prioritize, and people will prioritize what they value, and people will value what they understand. So if you don't understand the health impacts of a healthier flooring option, you're obviously not going to prioritize it or pay for it. And there's a lot of education that is required from us as professionals to say that like these two products, they're not the same. They have very different outcomes, right? So if you buy one versus, I mean, two products that like one costs more than another one, it's like, all right, sure, we'll take the cheaper one. But two products, you're actually, one might cost more, but you're getting something more out of it. It's up to us to make that case about what the value, what the difference in the value is, because the difference in cost is obvious, but the difference in the value is kind of what's going to make the difference in the decision.
Oh, and I think you brought up a good point that you don't always have to explain every decision, right? So sometimes you just bake it right in, and this is just what's on the project. This is the basis of design, right? And it's already built in to fitting the budget and those sorts of things.
Lots of things never get questioned. So some things will, but a lot of things won't. And you don't have to add, like you never say, oh, are you interested in sustainability, right? Or would you like our project to be, would you like your project to be more sustainable? Because the answer is going to be no. And you mentioned regional differences before. It's like, so my experience is working in both Texas and Louisiana, and also in Portland, Oregon. And kind of my expectation was that there would be a big cultural difference between how people see sustainability. And I haven't really experienced that to be the case. My experience is more like sustainability, we can't afford that. Regardless of where you're coming from. Not because it's true, just because that's the perception. Like the word sustainability means added cost. It means tacking things on, it means altruism. And we need to eliminate those misconceptions, right? Sustainability, if we look at through specific strategies of the framework, like advancing climate, advancing health, advancing equity, doing better on carbon, we can design these things in a way where the project will be different, and it will be better, but it won't cost more.
Yeah. Well, so shifting gears a little bit from clients' perspective to let's say professionals in practice wanting to do more. I think, you know, my personal experience is even when you're talking to a room full of architects, you still tend to get that tenseness or kind of glazed over expression when you're starting to bring up some of these topics, just because you know, the idea of sustainable design seems very complex, and it could be very intimidating still. So how do we help others within the design industry see sustainable design excellence as an achievable goal that shouldn't be intimidating, and it's not, you know, only full of hard to calculate metrics or full of them at all for that matter?
Right. I think we can, I'll think about this answer in like two different ways. One is the actual strategies. Often sustainability is perceived as highly technical, calculation-based, ideas around optimization, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's like, you don't need to optimize the ideal window-wall ratio. You need to use the best practice kind of 30 to 40% window-wall ratio. And you shouldn't design a building with a 60% window-wall ratio or more. And we don't need to run any calculations. You don't need an energy model to tell you that. Similar examples, like the West is going to produce you're going to get more heat gain from the West, right? So your windows should probably be smaller if you're in a cooling climate. You should probably have a pretty good solar heating coefficient. I do provide some like baseline calculations in the book for these numbers.
I was just thinking that.
But the idea of optimization, like,
very, you know.
yeah, and that's my hope. It's like we don't need to optimize these things. Like we just need to kind of codify best practices and just repeat them, because we know it works. We know what window wall ratios work, right? We know what glazing metrics work. We want to use simulation and calculations and all the complex math to like solve very novel questions. And for most projects, there's no novel questions to solve. right? So I often say like, and energy modeling is great, right? But energy modeling should get a building from 85% of the way there up to like 100% of the way there, right? Most of the impact, most of the design strategies just come from best practices, and then you can optimize from there. And if you don't get up to optimizing, it's fine. You're already 85%. What we should not be doing is designing without the best practices. We shouldn't be putting Western-facing curtain walls. We shouldn't be putting like huge cantilevers that need an incredible amount of structure to hold them up. We shouldn't be putting chemicals in our projects that we know are toxic. We shouldn't be putting sealed windows in our projects, which we know will result in the building being unoccupied if the power goes out. These are just best practices, right? And we don't have to ask permission for most of this. I occasionally have to ask permission for operable windows, but we can just do these things. And again, you can always optimize further. If you wanna bring in the computers, you can optimize indefinitely, but you don't want to optimize past the point where it makes a real difference. And then the other question about like, another way of addressing the same question, but from a cultural standpoint, is I mentioned kind of on the list of like the right culture, this idea of safety through social belonging. And often, and at some firms I've experienced, the person who cares about sustainability is advancing these ideas and putting in extra work because they're personally passionate about it, right? And that's really not the best way of getting these ideas, right? We don't want to punish somebody for being passionate by making them do additional work. It's like, oh, this love sustainability, so you're going to do the LEED checklist now. We should encourage people we should provide people with the time that's necessary to do good design. We should encourage people to advance designs that benefit the planet and benefit people. But that should really be like at the level of the firm, these are the goals that we want to achieve, and empower everybody to work towards those goals. And that's like one of the reasons when I consult with firms, is like you start with a vision, and then you empower people to make the decisions that they see are necessary to achieve that vision. And you don't want to have internal roadblocks. Like you don't want to show up at a design crit and like criticize somebody for focusing on material selection, right? Or like
if it's all moving towards the general vision,
it's all
like
moving towards
you're not focused
goals.
on a checklist. It's not about a checklist of metrics and meeting a certain standard. It's all moving towards the same vision.
Good. Yes, exactly. Very well said.
Right. So along those lines, I think it's hard to lose that perspective and, remember that you're designing spaces for people. This isn't just about that SIA databases and calculations and getting very specific into systems and what your R values should be, So, and as you've pointed out, current practice, how we're doing things isn't how we want to be doing things, or isn't how we should be doing them. So what tips do you have to keep, designers focus on their greater impact and not get caught up in the current way of doing things?
So we should recognize kind of what's wrong, right? We should recognize the fact that the way that we practice today does leave a lot on the table. And when we're designing buildings that are using more energy than they should, or maybe kind of contributing to some problems in other parts of the planet, we should recognize that there are problems. At the same time, we shouldn't get too caught up in everything, right? It's like incremental progress is totally the name of the game. Every project is an opportunity to advance a specific idea, to kind of help a client or consultant or even somebody that you work with at your firm kind of see the world in a new way. And there's always, like, you don't want to fight for something to the point where you're digging yourself in the ground. You always want to kind of pick your battles, advance these ideas little by little, and then move the profession along and move your practice along. And it's really hard to get, it's really easy to get bogged down, and but it's important to be optimistic, and it's important to kind of be inviting and bring people along, and kind of share the benefit, like continuously share the benefits. That if we design this slightly different way, this is what we could achieve. We can achieve this greater community. We can achieve a greater climate. We can protect the natural world. We can help protect people. So keep sharing these ideas, but recognize the fact that only a few things are going to be able to change per project, and practice transformation. Sometimes it's quick, and I've seen that before, but often it's slow, right? And just got to stay committed for the long term.
I think some of those, early project pre-design interactions and including your client and being a little bit more focused on community aspects or finding those really rooted reasons why, you'd have some inspiration for a project tend to really help ensure those stay focused throughout the project, and then also help focus everything on designing for people and their end use.
And I think what you're getting to a little bit is this idea of storytelling, right? If you can come up with a convincing story early in design and pre-design or whatever, that the client is really bought in on, and it's a story that describes like the right project, the project we want to end up with, it's going to happen, right? People can get sold on stories in the way that they won't get sold on data. So be creative, right? And kind of connect the design vision of a project to the outcomes we want to achieve, and get people excited about that.
Yeah, it's like the greater vision, right? You're visualizing how it's going to be used in the end. So pretty early in the book, you take a maybe not so often voice stance on some well-known architecture, and maybe starchitecture, as it's been called by many. How does that relate to this discussion? Why is starchitecture not design excellence?
So it's easy to get pulled in by an evocative image, right? And we do this kind of thing all the time, where you just see something stunning, and you forget that it might not be the best the best thing to actually. So what the Framework for Design Excellence did, I think very powerfully, was said, good design solves problems. Good design advances climate, resilience, human health, equity. And that doesn't mean it doesn't have to look good, right? It obviously has to look good. But we don't just do things for the sake of looking good anymore and call that good design. It's just, I don't think that was ever appropriate, but especially not now, just too many problems that we deal with. So I feel very strongly that the project looks great, but doesn't solve problems. We should not celebrate that project. And I think that one of the successes of the Framework for Design Excellence, and the way some of these ideas have made it into design awards across the country, is that different projects are being recognized than they were 5 years ago. And I think that's huge progress. I try to, in the book, I try to make an underlying case for this idea through a discussion of the difference between art and architecture, where art doesn't have the outward impact that architecture has. And that allows artists to be more provocative and to be more experimental, and to like really, really push aesthetic, creative ideas, because the physical impacts of a painting or a sculpture or another work of art are just not that big. Architecture doesn't have that luxury, right? We have real physical impacts of what we do. So like you design a building, like sites get cleared, materials are mined, trees are felled, the stuff is brought to the site. People occupy the building. Those people have like lives and families. Just the impact is too great to do weird stuff. So I think that we need to be very careful.
Not impactful stuff, right? Yeah.
Right. It's the swirls, right? We can't do swirls anymore, right? We can't just, you can't do, like, the reason for doing something can't be because it looks cool, or because it has some like esoteric meaning. Like we need to do things because they help people. and architecture, I think, has been changing significantly for the better. So what I tried to do with the book, particularly the first chapter, where I talk about kind of form and function and what form and function might mean today, where we're dealing with climate change, is to kind of give a little bit of explanation to this idea that's already out there about good design serves people, good design solves problems. But I wanted to provide maybe a little bit more kind of, I don't know, heft about what the fundamental reasoning.
Absolutely. It seems like once that you just presented with that, it makes so much more sense. You know, I think it's on a lot of minds, but maybe not always said.
Yeah.
But
and I'm also open to other interpretations on this topic, right? Like if I mean, there are people who think that like beauty in itself is this kind of just this phenomenal thing to contribute to the world, and if, I don't know, if it causes the sea level to rise, like, so be it. And like that's fine. That's a legitimate kind of interpretation as well. But it's not the only one.
and you're not saying that beauty is not part of what should be
No.
considered.
Yeah. I mean,
that is part of it.
Right. If impactful design is ugly, we shouldn't be doing it. Right. We should do things. There's no reason why a building that kind of sequesters carbon and nurtures can't be beautiful. In fact, it has to be.
That's why we all have jobs, right?
That's why we all have jobs.
All right, so one final closing question before we move on to audience questions would be just kind of a good wrap up. If there's one thing you want everyone to leave this webinar with today, internalizing one lesson to put into practice on every project, what would that be?
I think that, so one of the guiding principles that I mentioned for the book was the constraints are not what they seem. And I think what I would say is that if you are working on a project and you're finding yourself up against a barrier because the client's not interested, because your design team internally is not interested, because the client doesn't have the money, or whatever the reason is, I would say question the constraints. Say, is there another way of getting this point across? Is there another way of bringing this to the project? So it's very easy to just kind of work towards something, run into a roadblock, and just drop it. So I guess one thing that I would share and hope to encourage people to do is think maybe there's another way of improving the project, getting that idea across. It's always worth trying.
Absolutely. I think moving the profession as a whole, you know, incrementally forward. All right, so we have a number of questions. Looks like people have been doing a great job throwing them in there. First one is, if you're new to all of this, where should you start? Vision, practice, or design?
I think if you're new to all of this, yeah, start from the beginning. Like, so what vision? I think we fundamentally need to understand why we want to do what we're doing. Practice is kind of all about kind of setting up an environment so that you don't have the traditional roadblocks. And design runs into the strategies. And I say just, yeah, give it. I know the book is 400 pages, so I apologize for that. But these topics are broad and they're nuanced, and the nuance is essential. So yeah, so give it a go. But I mean, if you need to skip around the design chapter, you can focus on the topics that come up as they come up. Those are just kind of topic after topic. You don't have to read them in order, for instance. I think that the vision, I think the first one is probably important.
Great. All right, this next one's long and complicated, I feel like. All right, so the framework for design excellence has been adopted as a definition of good design by AIA. But as we know, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit the question here. You know, it's not incorporated into all of the standards. We're still seeing this architecture, this other more novelty architecture related to aesthetics being lauded. So how do we imbue these values more broadly into the profession and overcome the perception of sustainability as other?
Yeah, so this is so I mean, I think there's two ways of addressing this. One is within a practice and one is within the profession. And so we start within the profession. Design awards are essential to this. And when I was practicing in San Antonio, and I was the chair of the Committee on the Environment in San Antonio before I joined the National Committee on the Environment. One of the great successes that we had was coordinating with the Design Awards Committee, and we worked out a deal where COTE got to choose one of the 3 design jurors. So you need 2 things in order to kind of from an award standpoint. You need the standards, right? And we have that, right? It's fairly clear, design awards across the country, that projects need to respond to the framework for design excellence. But you also need a jury that cares about the framework for design excellence and understands it and interprets it. And once we are able to get somebody who is knowledgeable in kind of technical design strategies on the jury, the awards that started to change. And I would say that the design quality stayed the same, but impacts really kind of increased in terms of award recipients. So I would recommend kind of look at award juries in your local chapter. Make sure that the award juries are considering the framework. Make sure that submissions to award programs are considering the framework, and then make sure that the actual jury, at least somebody on the jury, is well versed in these topics and help interpret kind of positive design strategies for the rest of the jury.
I love that answer because I'm literally working on things like that as the past awards AI Iowa Awards chair this year. So this is we're on the right track, Iowa.
Great.
All right. Next question would be, can Corey share any top strategies for developing the right firm culture? It's very hard to change culture within a firm, and has even led. That's even led from the top, even though grassroots staff level activity sure helps make it stay.
Yes, this is a real challenge, right? And this is fundamental. I'll provide a brief answer, but I put a lot of this. I worked with a lot of firms on this, and I wrote it all in section 2 of the book. So I highly recommend that this question or that. But I want to talk about like the idea of incentives. A lot of firm culture is based on both intentional and unintentional incentives. So let's say that somebody puts in extra effort to make the project perform better, right? Maybe they run a daylight simulation and shift some windows so that the daylight is better, so the project's more daylight autonomous. How does the firm respond to that? Does the firm respond to that by saying you're wasting time? Or does the firm respond to that, and it's specifically firm leadership? Or does the firm leadership respond to that being like, wow, what leadership you are showing on your project? Is there an incentive to prioritize getting things right at your firm? Are people celebrated for getting things right? Or are people celebrated for maybe cutting corners if that's going to make the project more profitable? So I've had experiences, and I've heard from firms where kind of people are discouraged from putting in around, let's say, a daylight simulation, which might take 2 hours, because the project will look less profitable if that time is spent on it. So I would say broadly, make sure that people are being rewarded for activities that push the firm vision. First of all, you need a firm vision, right? And let's just assume that we want to. Make sure people are being rewarded for putting the effort that advances that, and make sure people are not being kind of discouraged from doing that, either, again, intentionally or unintentionally. And make sure that leadership, if leadership is bought in on these ideas, they need to set the example, right? If we get pushback from a client, it's the principal in charge who needs to respond to be like, no, energy is carbon is super important on this project, right? It shouldn't be dependent on the person who might know the most about carbon, but maybe doesn't have the seniority on the team to feel empowered to do that. So incentives, understand what they are, change the wrong ones, and read section 2, which will provide a lot more information on practice transformation.
Absolutely. All right, we maybe have enough time for a couple more questions. I think this next one, how do you deal with the urgency around climate action with the long-ish timelines of projects? what advice do you have for negotiating that tension?
Yeah, so I mean, climate is a especially challenging issue because your contribution, the individual building's contribution to the global climate is minuscule, and the timeline is so long that you don't, and there's no like direct feedback. I do think it's important to, obviously important to prioritize climate, prioritize carbon reduction, but it's not always the right move to kind of advance the best design strategies through the lens of climate action. So again, let's say that we can, let's say that we can conserve energy with a more robust enclosure, and that also makes the project more comfortable and more resilient. That's probably the approach to pushing kind of carbon reductions. Electrification is incredibly important, and you can make a case for a health case for not burning gas inside of the building. Where an all-electric building kind of advances our climate goals, but also is fundamentally healthier to occupy. So some clients are going to be really interested in climate, some won't, but often you can get these strategies that impact climate across through resilience, through health, through other means that might be more kind of interesting to the individual client.
Yeah, I think focusing on those, that prioritization and those, that almost zoomed out, that big picture impact is really what it comes back to.
And then from an embodied carbon standpoint, like that's obviously that's incredibly important. Like dig into the materials. Often there's similar materials that embodied carbons, but cost the same, have the same aesthetic qualities. So like that's another piece where you can just put in a little additional work, understand the differences, but never have to talk to the client about it.
Yeah, I think that touches on another question. I don't know, do we have enough time for one more or two more maybe, but there's a question.
I think we can, I'll be quick.
All right, there's a question about something like lower carbon concrete and other products that have an externalized cost to the environment, but maybe not a direct effect to the client in, you know, their experience with the building at the end.
Yeah, so it's a classic example. Like low carbon concrete is one. FSC lumber, I think, is an important one. There's definitely a cost premium for FSC lumber. It provides no benefit to the client, but it's important. Or at least climate smart lumber in general, like understanding the forestry practices that led to lumber. And I'm going to go back to the idea of the story here, right? There's no practical benefit to the client, but if you can craft a story about why this project kind of used a specific type of lumber, which aligns with, let's say, the mission of the client or the goals of the client in another way, and they can tell the story and they get bought into it, kind of that's how you sell these ideas.
Or they can charge more for rent because these were priorities in the building. I mean, so yeah. I think it might not always be a value proposition, but if you can, you know, bring money into it in the positive, typically that tends to help as well.
Yeah, 100%, 100%, right? Get people excited about the marketing and build the brand around sustainability, and yeah, and there's a lot of there.
Yeah. All right. So one final, more broad, fun one directly to you, Corey, would be, was your initial passion in sustainability or architecture? Which came first?
My initial passion was sustainability, though I've always been interested in architecture. I have a degree in environmental studies undergrad before I went to architecture school for a master's degree. But I've always loved buildings, and I remember growing up building kind of elaborate sandcastles, and I'd always be very interested in the environment and its impact on us. But when I was studying environmental studies, I recognized the impact that buildings can have and the potential that buildings have to make the world a better place. And I think that's the best place to kind of put our energy if you're interested in sustainability or architecture first.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is all the time we have for today. Thanks everybody for coming out, and I believe there will be a recording that should be sent out following this. So if you want to come back and rewatch anything, but most importantly, go out and get the book and read and learn and start transforming the way that you're approaching your projects.
Thanks,
Thanks so much.
everyone.
Thanks, Lindley.